Hello, everyone. Greetings, greetings. Thank you so much for being with us today. We hope you are doing well and staying safe and continuing to be resilient and protecting yourself as best you can, ideologically, spiritually, physically, politically, educated, in any manner, shape, or form that you see fit. Welcome, welcome, welcome to another episode of Our Ancestors' Voices, a weekly seminar that is hosted by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. We thank you all so much for being with us today. And we'd like to start as we always do, especially if this is your first time. But even if you are returning, we welcome you back and we're so glad you are with us again. We'd like to start as we always do by acknowledging the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. Without them, of course, we know that their land is encompassing of the very top of Canada all the way to the very bottom of Chile, right? And so, how appropriate for us to be talking about Cuba and the liberation of Cuba. I find it fitting for us to wrap up this third installment seminar breakout of my trip to Cuba by acknowledging the indigenous tribes of the Cuban land, right? So if you are somewhere where you have already learned the name of the land, then you can say it with me while you're muted or just joining another platform on another platform broadcast. But I'm going to say the Cuban indigenous tribes. And then we should always be knowing the names and learning the names of the land so that we can continue to make that practice of decolonizing the space that we are in. So some of the indigenous tribes that I want to give a shout out to are known as the Guatahatbayas, the Siboneyes, the Arawak, and the Tainos. And of course, I would be remiss if I also did not mention the Muwekma people who are responsible for this land that I am on right now, colonized to San Jose. So we acknowledge our indigenous comrades. We thank them for allowing us to be in their space, and we hope that they know that we are with them to the end. We understand that their struggle is our struggle, and we are thankful that they understand that our struggle is also their struggle. And of course, we need to acknowledge our African ancestors as well, for which without them, none of us would be here today. I will be talking in great detail today about many, many, many ancestors who have passed on, but also some really amazing comrades that have done a tremendous amount of work to help free African people all over the world, and they're still living. And I was privileged and honored with the chance to meet them while I was on this trip. So even if we are acknowledging folks that have passed on, or if we're acknowledging folks that are still with us, let us continue to learn a new African person's name at least one a week, if not more, especially at this time where it's so sexy to be ignorant and to not know information. Let's resist that and let's push against that. And let's learn as many African names as we can, especially those who were born outside of the US, because we understand just how important it is to seek that kind of information that tends to be withheld and that tends to be not provided. And so, like, this is the importance of political education, because if you're not able to do that work and to get that information, then it will continue to be missing for you. So, just to give you a little background on our ancestors' voices. So, this is a weekly seminar, as I said, that is sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, also known as the AAPRP. The All African People's Revolutionary Party is a mass independent organization. We are a political party that is based out of Africa. And quite frankly, we believe in Pan Africanism, which is one unified socialist Africa. We believe that Africa needs to be considered a one entity, as Kwame Nkrumah referred to it as the United States of Africa. And we believe that once Africa becomes a socialist USA of Africa or a United States, then a lot of the problems, if not all of them, right, will soon begin to go away. Why? Because once Africa is socialist in nature and in practice and is able to regain control of resources, dissemination of mass production, to have control over profit, to have control over how the resources are sold for profit that are coming from the land. Once those kind of things start to become back into the control of the African masses, that means that Africans everywhere, even those that are not on the continent, are going to be impacted in a very positive way, may I add. So that's going to really change the course of how we are treated, how we are perceived, how we perceive ourselves, how we treat ourselves. That's going to change a lot of that. So we believe in that. And that's why this organization is based out of Africa, because we acknowledge that the problems did not start in San Jose, California. They did not start in Miami. They did not start in Canada. They did not start in Germany. They started in Africa when our ancestors had to either run and not get caught by the slave catchers, or unfortunately, they were caught and enslaved and dragged onto those ships, right? So our work is based and defined off of several different founders who started this organization. One in particular by the name of Kwame Nkrumah, who actually wrote the book that you see at the bottom of your screen, The Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. And the book defines Pan-Africanism as this idea that, you know, once Africa is more united and connected and not embracing of the colonial borders, then we're in a better position to, again, have that control of the resources to determine the outcome of how the profit is used with those resources. We can have more connections to decenter colonization and to regain connection and unity, what it means to erase tribalism, what it means to eradicate all the systemic oppression that has been exacerbated or that has been manifested or that has been reintroduced since colonization. So whether it is genital mutilation, whether it is patriarchy, whether it is homophobia, whether it is polygamy, like all of those things. As African people, we need to be having continuous conversations about the benefits of those things, and in our new socialist Africa, whether or not we want to see those things happening. And because we'll have control of our land again, we'll be able to make those determining factors. This is why we understand how important it is to regain that access to land. Our Ancestors' Voices is a weekly broadcast that is brought to you every week by Comrade Ajamu Umi, who is a longtime organizer with the All African People's Revolutionary Party. If memory serves me, he is quickly approaching 41 years, if not 40 years, and maybe about 6 or 7 months. So coming up on the 41st year very soon. And then I am his daughter. My name is Shukura Umi, and I have been a part of Work Study, which is a foundation of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. February 6th was my 6th year that I have been in Work Study. So really excited to be a part of this organization. I'm really thankful for the knowledge and the opportunities that have presented themselves to me being a part of this. And as a matter of fact, shout out to all people with the All African People's Revolutionary Party who have been to Cuba before with the Venceremos Brigade. One person in particular, she knows who she is. Without her, I wouldn't have even have known about this trip or this brigade, and I certainly wouldn't have applied to be a part of this experience. So I'm really, really thankful for my relationship with the All African People's Revolutionary Party, because that has been a foundation for me, not just to have a better understanding of my African revolutionary African personality, or what we call RAP and the AAPRP, but also just how that's all connected to the larger scale of everything at play. If you all were able to tune in for my first installment of part one, or even my second installment, I mentioned to you that I went on this trip with the Venceremos Brigade, and everything was collective in nature because we wanted to promote and support the socialist Cuban Revolution. We wanted to support the socialist values. We wanted to embrace the socialist values. Part of being a socialist is being collective in nature, and it is resisting and eradicating the individualistic needs and ways and desires. It's not about individuals from a socialist standpoint. And so because of that, the VB actually attracted 13 All African People Revolutionary Party members. There were 13 of us on that brigade out of 40 people. I mean, that's more than a fraction of the entire brigade. And so just thinking about how this work is shaping us and us helping us to understand why it's important not to have oppression Olympics, and why it's important to be aware of your power and your space, to be socially aware, to move up and to move back, to have depth without drowning, to understand simultaneity, and to frame everything from the concept of US racism, and because more than likely it's not just US racism, and it's not just racism, it's the US and how it's framed it in terms of imperialism and capitalism. So this is the third installment. Hopefully you were able to tune in for the first two. If not, we would definitely encourage you to go back and find those on our YouTube page, AAPRPCA. AAPRPCA is the YouTube page. We definitely encourage you to go back and find those. And so let's jump right in and pick up where we left off. And so some of the things I'm going to say today are going to be repeated because it's an installment and they're linked into the other two. So it's obvious that I'm going to be saying some things that are connected, but I'm also going to be saying some things that you've never heard before, or at least not from me in terms of this platform. You've never heard it. And so I want to start with highlighting what has happened, right? What happened? And then what were the impacts because of what happened? And then how are we dealing with what happened? And how have we dealt with what happened, right? And so that's kind of roughly the order that you'll be seeing these slides in. And so, just again, acknowledging that the Cuban Revolution, with the inception of 1959, but also let's give a shout out to the July 26 movement as well, because that was really instrumental in leading us to January 1st, 1959. And so also in just kind of seeing how with the July 26 movement, there were several members who wanted to take it upon themselves to deconstruct and to tear down the Fulgencio Batista regime that had been tormenting and harming Cuba. Okay. And we've talked about Batista a couple of times, but I also think it's important to note this was very much the connection between the US and Cuba at that time. There were Europeans who were traveling freely from the US to Cuba. The hotels were booming, but also prostitution was at an all-time high. Illiteracy rates were disgusting and causing so much harm and detriment to the economy, because really the only money that was coming in was from tourists who didn't have any reason to benefit the economy on a larger scale. They just wanted to benefit themselves, hence the prostitution and the sex and the drugs and all that stuff. I also want to point out that Batista was very much in support of white supremacy, very much in support of operating and running off of a white supremacy regime. And that we know to be true, because why else would he have been so close with the US in terms of their connection and their shipment of goods and exchanging of resources and things like that? That's going to be important to remember for later when we start to talk about Victor Drake. So please remember this piece about before the Cuban Revolution, white supremacy was at an all-time high. And I'll even go farther enough to say even Africans on the island, and I'm saying Africans because they're all Africans, because I made that clear that the Cuban blood is mixed with African, indigenous, and with European Spaniard, right? So like these three combinations are what make up Cuban, right? But I think it's also important for us to understand, but Africa was the foundation for a lot of how Cuban got its start, because really it was the indigenous, then it was the Spaniards, and then it was enslaved Africans. And that trio is what made up the Cuban person today. Saying all of that to say, though, we have to kind of think about how even with that, you have different marks of how people are being treated. So in everywhere, and that's the thing about socialism, is it's a bridge between capitalism and communism. So it's not to say that socialism is perfect and it has no issues. No, we understand that socialism is trying to get rid of the individualism. It's trying to get rid of the class divide. It's trying to get rid of patriarchy. It's trying to get rid of white supremacy. It's trying to get rid of those things. This is why you have a bridge. It's the transitional period. This is where you start to acknowledge ways to create interventions to really get rid of that kind of thinking and to eradicate it. And you come up with interventions and escalation plans on how you're going to deal with the fact that some people are still going to be behaving in this way. What is the protocol when that happens, right? So I want to be clear about that too, because I think it's also important to note, especially when we get closer to talking about Victor Drake, he mentions in several interviews, because thankfully this comrade is still alive and still very much cognizant and aware of what's happening and aware of what has happened and aware of how he has contributed to what has happened. Okay. And so he was able to talk to us, and we had a chance to sit down with him. And he talked in his interview with us, but also in other streamed interviews, you can see him. He's talking about how at that time, before the Cuban Revolution, before the socialist Cuban Revolution, Africans weren't even allowed to go all the same places that Europeans were allowed to go. And remember, at this point, you know, the indigenous people were all killed off. So it was indigenous people, then it was the Spaniards who came, and then they needed workers, so they went to Africa and they abducted us, right? So I I just think it's important to really break that down. So you have Europeans and you have Africans, and you took us from our home, but we can't even fraternize and enjoy our lives now that you've brought us to this place. Like I really want to frame that so that we can understand that. And I'm so thankful that Victor explained that, because when you ask yourself, well, why were so many Africans fighting for the Cuban Socialist Revolution? That's why. Because they wanted a better life, you all. And it got to a point where some Europeans, some Spanish Europeans, even started to understand, yeah, this is really not okay. Batista is not who we thought he was, or he's on a power hungry grip or whatever. Now we're going to join this battle because even we're not happy with what's happening. He's making all this money and I barely have money to feed my family. And that's how it starts, right? That's how it starts. And so again, I give a shout out to the M26-7, because without them going in and starting this initial deconstruction of power on July 26th, then we start to see how it's kind of folding in, and people are really starting to pay attention to Fidel. They're starting to pay attention to the work that Fidel is doing with the comrades and why they even tried to take control of the Army naval base in the first place, right? And so like this is really kind of breaking down into that, where we can really start to see how this is impacting everything. And so some of this stuff I already said, like I said, but I just wanted to kind of paint that picture so we could really understand that. So now we can talk about the impacts of what has happened. So I mentioned to you all that in the 12 days that I was there, we experienced daily blackouts. Sometimes they were for the entire day, and sometimes there were just periods of the day where the power would be out. Again, I explained to you that socialist Cuba is in fact in the transitional period of socialism, which is the bridge between capitalism and the bridge between communism. So socialism is where you're starting to try to get rid of divisions that are causing people to be separated, such as classism, for example. And I bring that up because we can even think about how there are some situations where families are more likely to be well off than other families. Excuse me. And it's because of that class divide. Okay. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the upcoming slides. But I do want to highlight for you all, even on days where I mentioned that I was only able to take one hot shower in the 12 days. So even on days out of the 12 days, I would say the water was either off for 4 out of the 12 days, or it was very low pressure for at least 4 of the 12 days. So low that it wasn't enough to take a shower with, not enough to wash my hands, things like that. And so just kind of thinking about that in terms of, again, we're not looking at, so the water wasn't on consecutively. This is why socialism doesn't work. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is, as a matter of fact, socialism does work because people have been able to take very little water and they have much better conservation skills than any of us who are in the United States, because in the US, we don't have to think about the fact that we don't have access to water. Some of us aren't even humble enough to acknowledge that we can just turn the water on and leave it running all day and not think about the waste of energy, not think about the waste of resources and materials. We're not thinking about conserving. We're not thinking about what it means to have not access to that just tomorrow. Some of us think about that, but the overwhelming majority of us do not think about that. If we did, then we would have better behaviors in place where we wouldn't be wasting water as I speak. We wouldn't be turning on the water while we brush our teeth. Meanwhile, you're not using the water, but the water is still running. Some of us do that. We wouldn't be turning on the water and leaving it running while we're washing our hands. Some of us do that. And then there's some of us that try to turn it off as we can when we can remember, because we've just had this life-changing event. And this is why we encourage you to go, so that you can experience it for yourself. I also just want to say that, you know, we continue to talk about the blockade. And so this is really important to mention this too. I specifically tried to provide you all with pictures of buildings throughout the island, so you can see just how magnificent folks have been able to be resilient and to work with what they have to build these beautiful buildings, right? And it's not to say that these buildings don't need remodels, right? When we were cleaning at the school was made primarily of cement and rock and concrete, right? And so we would clean the stairs and we were cleaning the floors. And by floors, I mean like the outside was cement, but we were still cleaning the rocks and cleaning them with soap and water, right? So when we got to the stairs, we were cleaning the stairs and I was wiping down the handrails, and you can see that the handrails are connected to I'll say like it was metal iron. It was iron. That's what it was. It was iron that was connecting the rail itself to the concrete step. But even the iron was starting to rust and it was starting to get loose, where the stairs itself was a little wobbly, but also the handrail was wobbly. And I'm saying that to say this: there's probably a reason why these resources that they are waiting on to tighten up those stairs are now on back order. And I'm saying that to be facetious because there is no such thing as back order. The bottom line is the US has probably stopped the potential for those resources to come into that island, just like they've stopped everything else because of this 60+ year blockade. So again, like I just want us to think about like how children are now in a dangerous situation going down these stairs when really that should be fixed because that's not safe for anyone. Let's also mention the fact that there are many of our differently abled comrades who are not able to come on these brigades because the island itself is not constructed for differently abled people yet. And I mean specifically for folks that may not have capacity to go up 4 or 5 flight stairs. Okay, for people who may not have the capacity to stand for that amount of time, for people who may not have the capacity to walk, right? So like I think that that's important to mention too. And it's not to show any exclusion on the island itself. Like the Cubans would love to have differently abled people there. But A, where are they going to get the resources? Because one of the material aids that was on our list was a wheelchair. Yes, you all, they're asking for wheelchairs. They are asking for wheelchairs because that's how bad the need is, where the US won't even let them get the rubber and the metal and the plastic and the cushion and the cotton and all the things that are materials required to make a wheelchair, because I'm sure Cuba has construction engineers to do it. So it's not a question of can we do it? It's a question of do we have the resources to make this happen? That was an overarching thing that I continued to learn while I was there. And so now it's to the point where they have a wheelchair deficit. They have a disparity with wheelchairs and they don't have enough for everybody that needs one. And so like I really think it's important to make these connections. Okay. So like this is kind of how we're kind of breaking this down and thinking about that. And then just really quickly, one of the events where I mentioned to you, we were kind of having the ICAP party. We all had our tables of our political education. And I talked to you all. It looks like I'm freezing up a little bit, so I'll repeat that. I mentioned to you all that we had the ICAP celebration at the last installment that I did for this report back. And we all had our political education tables. And so this was a table from Russia. And they have their flyer here. And I don't speak Russian, so I can't translate everything to you, but it clearly has a picture of the Cuban flag and it has somebody who has melanin in their skin holding up the flag. And then this probably translates to blockade no in Russia somehow, some way, right? So like, I'm just trying to paint this picture for you so you can see that. So it's not a question of does socialism work? No, it's a question of how many people are going to be on the right side of Cuban history, her history, their history, because they understand that this is bigger. And more importantly, what Cuba has been able to do, what Cuba has been able to accomplish, it goes without saying how remarkable and how impressive and how motivating it is. This is why they're under attack, you all. This is why socialist Cuba is under attack, because the US does not want you to know, Europe, Israel, they do not want you to know that socialism not only is effective and can happen, it is happening and it has happened. They don't want you to know that. They don't want you to know that there's a possibility that not only can you have a better way of life where everyone is literate and reading and can write. They don't want you to know that that's possible. They don't want you to know that you can live in a world where you don't have to have children that are not educated, because education is free and no one should have to be limited by how much money they have to spend to be educated. They don't want you to know that that's a possibility. They want you to just see the propaganda of how socialist countries are struggling, how they're starving, how they are malnourished and impoverished and all those things. And I'm not saying that that is not true to some extent. I didn't travel around the whole island. I can only speak to my experiences of what I saw and what I took in with my own body in person. But what I will tell you is Cuba has done everything that they can to try to create some preventative measures. So they're trying really hard not to let it get to the point where people have reached in poverty. They're trying really hard not to get to the point where people are malnourished. They're trying really hard not to get to the point where people are not able to maintain work because they're not educated. This is why education is free. This is why that they have food pantries. This is why that they have clinics in every municipal. This is also why they have doctors in every province. That's by design, you all. That's by design. And when you go in to get medical care, let's say if you are pregnant, the minute that they find out that you're pregnant, they call you up to schedule an appointment so you can go in and get tested for everything. And I do mean everything, because that was a question that I had to ask. How is it possible that you all have been able to maintain 0% of maternal mortality? And the tour guide that was giving us the tour said, as soon as you get pregnant, we test you for everything. We test you for everything. Even if it doesn't run in your family, we test you for it. And I'm thinking to myself, because I'm so used to capitalism and insurance companies, so I'm thinking to myself, how much is all that going to cost? Because doing a test for gestational diabetes, doing a test for preeclampsia, hypertension, that's a lot. But of course there is no insurance, because Cuba doesn't want you to, first of all, they don't profit off of your pain and your sorrow. That's the first thing. Let's say that again. They don't profit off of that. So there is no third party. There is no insurance. You just have universal health care. And there's a certain amount of funds that come in from different entities. The tour guide was explaining to me, there's the diocese churches, the Catholic churches, there's all these different entities. Some are religion based, some are not, and they've been putting money into this pot. They also get money as an island. The government has protected amount of monies to be able to afford for them to have universal health care. Now, some of those resources of money have reduced and been, not as accessible now, especially under the current administration for the U.S. But they have still found a way. This is where I think they're gonna lean more on us, you all, to be traveling there, because if they can't really afford to offer, to have this big pot of universal health care, then that might affect people having access to care. But if we can still use our US dollars to promote and to fund their economic island, right? And we can bring resources that they cannot get from the blockade, like medicine, like aspirin, like wheelchairs. If we're able to do that, that is still a way that we are resisting, is still a way that we are supporting the Cuban people. And at the end of the day, that is your utmost responsibility. As I said before, these imperialist entities, America, Europe, Israel, they do not want you to know how successful Cuba has been. They do not want you to know that. They want it to be a secret. They don't want you to tell anybody. They want you to be ignorant and dumb and not know. So you have to educate yourself. You have to know better. You have to communicate this to the world. That's why I'm doing these report backs, because I'm trying to let the world know that Cuba is doing just fine. This is why we have to protect them. I'm going to say that again because I froze up. Cuba is doing just fine. This is why we have to protect them. We want them to get better and get stronger, of course. But we're not going to accept the propaganda that they're starving and that they don't even have street lights. Like, we're not accepting any of that, because it's not true. It's not true. And this is why it's so important to know your history and to know your herstory and your theirstory, because if you're not careful, the oppressor will tell you anything they need to tell you to manipulate you and to lie to you. And then you're not going to understand why they're coming for Venezuela next. You're not going to understand why they're coming for Haiti. They're coming for these other places because they don't want them to get to where Cuba is. That's why. And again, like, this is why the connection is so important. What has the blockade done and why should it be lifted? People are not able to get resources like weapons. This is why China has had to provide weapons to Cuba, because they weren't able to get what they needed. This is where it becomes really interesting, because a limited oil is also a big and up and coming conversation, right? And then also the blockade needs to be lifted, because the longer the blockade exists, the more people will be in fear of socialism, and they will not be searching for the truth. They will not be researching it. And we simply need to look past that and do better. We need to look past that and do better. Okay, so I told you I'd be talking about the classism divide. So you all can see this photo in the bottom left. So this is just a photograph that was taken of one of the streets we were standing on. I don't really need you to pay too much attention to anything except for the wall unit that you see here on this wall. This is an air conditioning unit. And so for this particular, I'll say entity, because I don't think it's for the whole building. I think it's just for that unit. This particular unit or entity has this AC unit there attached so that that particular family has access to air conditioning. This is my point, case in point, this white circle that you see encompassing around this AC unit. The reason that socialist Cuba is still in socialism and not in communism yet, so we can't say that communism doesn't work because we haven't seen it yet. And the reason we haven't seen it is because if this was not a socialist empire, if it was a communist empire, there would be no class division. No class division. The reason we know that there's still a class division in Cuba is because we see one air conditioning unit, not 12 going down the row for all 12 of these units that we see. And I am asking you, it got pretty warm while we were there, 75, 80, 85 on a good day. If people had the choice of having an air conditioning unit, don't you think they would have one installed for their house? People most of the time don't want to not be comfortable for the most part, right? People want to be comfortable. We had air conditioning units where we were staying, and I was so thankful for that because there were some days where it was very, very warm in that room, right? So this is how you know it's still a class divide because this family has been able to afford a AC unit, but not the rest of the units. So you have to ask yourself, so if that is the case, then that means there must be something happening where this family has a little bit more resources to get this installed where the rest of the families don't. And that, my friends, is the definition of a class divide. Okay. I also want to point out this is such a revolutionary comrade here. So I don't think they shared too many details about this comrade, and her name escapes me right now. My apologies. But what you need to know is what she did. She was an Angolan fighter. She went to Angola and she helped Cuba when they went to fight with the African people in Angola. And so to just be able to stand next to her, to talk to her, I mean, we didn't really get a chance to talk, but just to see that she's still living and breathing, she's good, she's content, she's proud of what she's done, she's happy with the sacrifices that she contributed to and how she gave back for the Cuban Revolution, but also for the African Revolution. I mean, this is amazing. And I do remember the museum curator saying, you know, it's always interesting because this is why I said to you earlier, like there were some Europeans, some Spaniards, even they knew that the regime of Fulgencio Batista was wrong. And they wanted to do something differently to give back and to do the right thing. So even the museum curator was saying, you know, when you think about Angolan fighters, you don't think about a 84-year-old European white woman. And I was thinking, no, that's not the first thought that comes to my head. But she knew that she wanted to be a part of that. And she knew that she had a certain special skill set to be able to do just that. And they welcomed her in and she did what she had to do. This is a closer picture. I know you can't really see her face, but this is a little closer picture of that. I also want to highlight that after we were at the African Museum, we went across the way and there was a conference room where we sat and there were four panelists there and Victor Drakey was one of the panelists where they all were warriors who had fought either with the M26-7 group, the July 26 movement that I talked to you about originally that went with Fidel to take over the military base first before the January 1st revolution. But there were also other members who had worked with Victor Drakey because they had gone to the continent to fight. Some of them were Angola warriors, some of them Algerian warriors. Some of them had gone with Victor Drakey to fight in the Congo, right? It just depends. And so I'm just highlighting this again for you because we've already said this repeatedly, but it begs it begs to be mentioned again. We have the Congo, we have Algeria, we have Angola, we have Azania. Like we have several examples of when Cuba has shown up for Africa. So we have to correct people when they say stuff that is not true because we know that they don't know. We have to correct them when they say stuff that is not true. Okay, so now we're moving into how we have fought back because we talked about what happened, we talked about the impacts of what happened, and now we're talking about how we are fighting back. So you've heard me say this name already, Victor Drakey. Let me tell you about this comrade who is still living, by the way, and just is amazing in terms of their memory assets, their ability to recall information and to talk about the facts and to stand 10 toes down for why they did what they did. So Victor Drake fought against Batista's empire that forced white supremacy. And in many of the interviews, the one that we had in Havana, but also if you go on, any platform that has interviewed him, whether it's AfriStream or whatever it is, you can listen and they talk about how he talks about, sorry, how segregation was a really big thing in Cuba at that time. He talks specifically about how Africans could not frequent businesses, specifically hotels, for example. And that was one of the foundational movements for why he wanted to join the socialist Cuban revolution, because he wanted a different life for African people. He wanted people to actually have the benefits of going to businesses that they wanted to go to, right? Equity and equality, right? So he did fight with Fidel with the M26-7 group on July 26th, but he also was second in command with Che, Ernesto Che Guevara, when the Congo people, when the Congolese people asked him to come in support of fighting with Patrice Lumumba. So he was second in command with Che when they went to the Congo. He also fought with the Milcar Cabral. He also fought for Guinea's independence, Guinea-Bissau, and he was working with the PAIGC. And he met Kwame Nkrumah, which, as you know, was one of our founders. So Victor Drake is a name that we all need to say and know. This African is incredible, and it bears repeating for us to know who he is. I will also highlight this image here. You see another African here by the name of Antonio Maceo Grajeles. So Antonio was an Afro-Cuban fighter, and he believed in equity and equality. He did not like the fact that Cuba had separatist ways for Europeans from Spain and for Africans from the continent. And he used to always walk around saying, there's no white, there's no black, there's just Cuban. And so that was one of the motivations for why he wanted to join the different fights that were happening so that he could contribute and do his part. And in the next slide, I'll show you a museum statue that is dedicated to him, Antonio Maceo Grajeles. All right. I also just wanted to highlight this beautiful, beautiful chair that you see here that was carved out of wood. And even though this was presented in the African Museum, one of the first days that we were there, we went to this museum. But I also just wanted to show this as a way to showcase this is an example of how the Cuban people have made do with the resources that they have. So this chair was probably sent from one of the areas on the continent, and it was probably sent to Cuba maybe to be preserved or whatever that looks like. Maybe it was a gift from Algeria or the Congo, right? Or Angola. But even if it wasn't, I'm showing this to still show the case that because their materials are missing, because they don't have access to metal, because they don't have access to plastic in some cases, when they do have access to things like wood and a knife to be able to carve out, they really rely on those secondary skills because they don't always have the immediate resources that they need, again, because of the blockade. So I'm just trying to make a point twice where we can kind of see, this is why creativity is so important, but also this is why it's important to be able to work with different resources because you may not have access to everything that you need. I also just want to highlight really quickly that we will see in a couple more slides, there is several propaganda that was available on the island showing how Cuba is in solidarity with occupied Palestine and Palestinians getting their land back. And so we'll see some different examples of that in the upcoming slides. I've also been talking about it in the last two installments, but just wanted to mention that. And then I wanted to show you two pictures of the same event. So this is a picture of me. I don't really care for it, but it's fine. I'm so picky about my pictures, but whatever. So this is a picture of me, and I don't matter. I mean, I matter, but don't focus on me. I want you to focus on the person I'm talking to. Okay. So this is a prime minister of Havana. She is the first woman to serve in this role. And notice you all, she's just sitting there, arm's length from us. I want you to notice that. She's just sitting arm's length from us, okay? There's no bodyguards. There's no bodyguards outside. There's no Secret Service. There's no dogs or jet or whatever, Air Force One, whatever the thought is that you have in your mind, let that go, because that's not what this is, okay? I didn't even know that her position was as high ranking as it was because it was such a chill interaction that we had when she came to talk to us. And she spent 2.5 hours with us, you all. She spent 2.5 hours with us to the point where we had to go on Stack and like raise our hand to put our name on a list because we had so many questions. I love that somebody is reacting in the Zoom. Thank you, person. I love your reaction. Yeah, she spent 2.5 hours with us. And we had to go on Stack because we all had so many questions. And so then we're trying to think, how do I use depth without drowning and not, say this question that goes on and on? Because remember, there's a translator there. And so if we do speak Spanish, great. But if we don't, we're saying it in English and then she's waiting for the translation to come in so that she can now answer in Spanish. And then the translator needs to give it back to us in English. Mi español es un poquito, okay? It could be better, it could be worse, but I don't have enough Spanish skills to be able to ask the full-blown question that I wanted to ask. So I was doing half and half, right? So I say that to say the fact that she had carved out 2.5 hours, you all, the fact that she had carved it out, the fact that she wanted to be there, the fact that she was happy to be there. And she had the nerve to say to us, I'm so happy that you all are here. And I was like, you're the one who is like running the country right now. Like, we're thankful that you're here. We are so thankful that you're here. She was the nicest person. And I think that it's just important to, again, like highlight what that kind of humanism looks like. A lot of people asked her questions about the public health system. And we couldn't believe, that she was the age that she said she was because she looks very, very young. And she talked about how that's the benefit of having universal health care. And we all clapped. And what I remember is she would really light up and smile when we would respond because, we had to wait for the translation to come back. So it was a little bit delayed, but we would respond by laughing or clapping or uproar or whatever. And I remember one comrade asked her, so how do you deal with patriarch in the government? How do you deal with patriarchy on the island? Like, what does that look like in terms of practice? And she said, well, she said all the women, but in my mind, I was thinking all non-males. She said all the women belong to an organization. And we all just started laughing. And she was like, ¿qué es eso? Like, what are they laughing at? And he told her in Spanish, they're laughing because they can't believe what you just said. And then she said to us, you all don't have an organization in the US for women? And we said, no, we don't have anything like that. I think I froze up, so I'm gonna say that again. She asked him, why are they laughing? And the translator told her, they're laughing because they can't believe what you said. And then she said, you all don't have an organization for women in the US? And we all started laughing. And we were like, absolutely not. No, we're not that organized. The US don't care about us. No, 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 no. So I just thought that was hilarious. And she thought it was hilarious. And we all thought it was funny. And it was hilarious. So I just thought that was great. She was a breath of fresh air. And my question particularly was about if there is no insurance companies, how are interpersonal relationships and conflicts managed? And she had a lot of interesting things to say. She also talked about the infrastructure a little bit. I would say her response to my question probably was about 4 to 5 minutes long of her just talking and answering my question. So, I mean, it was just incredible, you all. And I just want you to think like, that would be like JD Vance coming to you and sitting with you for 2.5 hours. Like you're just not gonna get that. And I'm so glad that I was able to find this photo because I talked to Baba Ajamu about it and he said, so just think like, why did she not have security around her? Like what do you think the purpose of that was? And I thought about it for a minute and I said, well, it's obvious that she doesn't feel like her life is in jeopardy. And it's also obvious that the people don't want to take her life. And he was like, yeah. Also, like, it's not customary for that to be the case because she's not doing anything for anybody to want to take her life. No one is angry with the choices that she has made. She's showing up for the people. She's reflecting on the people. And so because of that, it's representative in what's happening. And so I think it's important for us to just have these kind of conversations. It's not just the propaganda. It's not just the capitalism. It's not just the imperialism. It's also the culture around how these things are exacerbated and how there's just really this communicative message that this is not accessible to you. You will never have access to this, and you are nowhere near in the same boat or planet that we're on. Meanwhile, she's just sitting with us having a conversation because we're trying to learn more about her island and she's trying to teach it to us. And this, my friends, is a great definition of political education. All right. So I also wanted to highlight the previous slide showed you how we were fighting back or how we have fought back, right? And so political education is an ongoing conversation. And so this slide is a great way for us to kind of wrap up how we are currently fighting back, okay? So I just want to remind folks that the blockade has cost billions of dollars to Cubans, preventing them to have the ability to develop sustainable food and medicine access. They don't have access to contraceptives, reproductive justice items. I'll also mention that for people that are pregnant, access to getting diapers, access to formula, even lactation resources. So whether it is a pump, if you want to pump your milk, like whatever that means, they don't have access to that kind of stuff. So when you do go to Cuba, because we are calling on you, asking you to go, and we will have the QR code just in the next slide for you to donate, because we strongly need your donations. Either when you go to Cuba or when you donate money, you can make the intention of donating it so that these folks can get some of the resources that they need. The struggle with the blackouts is so consecutive and consistent, you all. I would argue there's a blackout at least 2 to 3 times a week, if not more frequent. So because of that, you should already be thinking about how maybe some of the things that we need to try to work on is really understanding better how this blackout is not connected to socialism. This blackout is connected to the blockade that the US has put on Cuba. And I also want to say, and it's all connected, because when we were listening to Baba Ajamu give his report back, it was just blowing my mind. Like I was blown away. Like I was like, when he was talking, because we had just gone, he had gone on his trip, I had gone on my trip, and we both came back. And of course, we're talking while we're in the respective places, but still, but it's just a trip to me, just how different these two places are. And I understand they're different. Don't get me wrong. We're talking about Havana, Cuba, and Matanzas, Cuba, and we're talking about Azania, right, in Africa. Like I understand that those are different locations, but it's 2025, and Cuba, I still can only use cash in 2025 because of the blockade. Because you have to ask yourself, like, where is the connection with the financial access, the Visa and the Mastercards, like the fees that they're incorporating, the fees that vendors and shopkeepers would have to pay on the island to send to Master and Visa. Where are they going to get those kind of resources, you all? If it's a rolling blackout, then they can't accept debit card payments, right? Because then the machine is going to go down. They have to have stable Wi-Fi. If the Wi-Fi is connected to the electrical grid, I hope you all are seeing all these connections. So it's just fascinating to me that it's a cash-based only system in 2025. And meanwhile, in Azania, they can order food on Uber and get it delivered. And I'm like, what is happening? I just want to understand what is happening. That's just blows my mind. It blows my mind. And it's an impact of the blockade. It's an impact of the apartheid, right? It's an impact of both of those. And this is why we need to talk about it and connect it, because it is very much so there by design to prevent people from having a quality of life, the blockade. And I would argue it's the same for the apartheid. There is a specific group of people who are supposed to benefit from now being able to order food on their app, on their phone in Azania, and they don't look like you or me if you are African or of melanin, colonized person, right? Like that's kind of where we are. So it's just interesting. It's really, really interesting. And because of that, like now you're starting to think about all these different things and you're really starting to make these connections. So I'm even thinking about, financial security. I'm thinking about financial cybersecurity. I'm thinking about all these things in terms of how they're all connected, because the blockade has made it impossible for resources as simple as milk and pasta to get to the island. How would you be able to download an Uber app and have people working for Uber on the island? Uber is probably Zionist, but on top of that, they're probably not in a position where they even want to offer their jobs there, because they probably don't support the fact that Cuba is a socialist country. So like, it's just, these are the things, you all, like where we have to like break this stuff down. We have to think critically. We have to take it upon ourselves to be looking up companies I do it at least once a month where I look up the companies and I say, like, is this a Zionist organization? Is this a AFRICOM organization? Like, you're looking up these companies to make sure that where you are sending your money and supporting it, you have control to some extent on what that looks like. You know what I'm saying? And so just kind of breaking that down and understanding that. I also want us to kind of highlight and think about how this makes it really difficult for us to be able to get the kind of information that we need, because a lot of times this information is hidden from us on purpose. This is why I made this slide about how we're fighting back, because I was trying to highlight, again, the different experiences that I was able to take because I was there, which is why we continue to encourage you all to increase your political education. Theoretically by researching and reading, but also by purchasing a ticket and going through the VB brigade, applying and doing the interview with them, hopefully doing your research so that you can really wow them, and then having the chance to go, being able to get there and doing some work that is humbling you and reminding you and informing you of just how much you're fighting for and just how much you should be fighting for and why you should care. And then it's not enough for you to go there and do work. Now you have to come back with the responsibility that the work is not done. I just saw a calendar invite on my phone. There's a national VB call coming up just at the top of the hour when we finish this meeting. So my point is, like, the work doesn't stop even after you come back. And anybody who's been on this brigade can tell you that. This is one of 7 report backs that I'm doing today, one of 7, because I'm still trying to get the word out. I'm talking about it in my classes. I'm talking about it with my families. And it really was an impactful trip for me. So we have to continue to think about how are we showing up for Cuba, because Cuba has already shown up for us. Don't forget the previous 2 installments where I talked about the different ways that Cuba has helped medically, the different ways that Cuba has helped with disaster relief. They have continued to show up for all of humanity. So we would be remiss if we did not show up for them. I do want to start with this picture on the left, and I just want to even highlight, this is a picture of a dog, you all. And even the animals on the island, they just carried so much humanism with them. And they also carried, freedom and, like, I don't care. Like, they didn't seem scared or worried that we were going to harm them. They were like walking up to us like, hey, welcome to Cuba. Good to see you. Thanks for being here, And I just thought that was so cool how you would see the cats and the dogs roaming in the streets. And I took note that, even with the motorcyclists, even with the cars driving by, I wasn't really certain that people were going to be just hitting these animals and continuing on. There was too much humanity there. People were driving slower because they were aware of the fact that the dogs might be roaming the streets. They were more sensitive to that. We passed one lady and she had 12 cans of tuna open and the cats were just eating, and she was waving to us asking for money because she's trying to get more cans of tuna for the cats. And so I'm just saying, like, there's just, the humanity is just everywhere. I talked to you last week about how, again, I didn't see like malnourished and in poverty. I saw people smiling and dancing and laughing and joking. I saw people, they were at the park at 9 o'clock at night talking to their friends and playing loud hip hop music. And they were, breakdancing and doing all the things that people do when they have quality of life. People in love, holding hands, people skating in the streets, skating on roller skates, okay? Like, just having a good time on a Tuesday night, you know what I mean? And so it was just really fulfilling to see that. But even seeing the animals, I said to myself, man, even these animals understand what liberation looks like. Even they understand that, because the culture is impacting them too. How could it not? How could it not, right? Okay, so when we went to I think it was Matanzas. When we went to Matanzas, the campsite we were in, they had a cafeteria where we had access to the food. And there were all these stickers on the wall when you walked in. And obviously I couldn't get all of the pictures of the wall up, but you can see, like, Che, you can see the Cuban flag, you can even see the Palestinian flag. And then there's a sticker way down there that says, roughly translated, all the way from Ferguson to Palestine. Liberation is inevitable. And so, like, just this idea of how we're all coming together because our fight is the same, right? I also just want to highlight that when we went to the Carlotta Lusumi Museum, they had these beautiful, beautiful portraits of African art on the wall outside. And I just thought that was so beautiful. I also want to highlight the Museo statue that I mentioned before. So the comrade in the previous slide, this is his statue, and you can see, him at the top. He's standing on the horse, and he has either like it's a very large weapon. I couldn't remember exactly what it was, but he's got this very large weapon that he's holding. And then there's pictures of birds and just all kinds of other animals that are surrounding the statue around it. It's just beautiful. It is absolutely gorgeous and beautiful. I wanted to show you another picture. This is where the prime minister was standing up to talk to us. And like I said, her answers averaged about maybe 4 to 6 minutes apiece. So she was giving very detailed information. She didn't want to rush us, and she didn't want to rush the information that she was sharing with us. And it just meant so much to have her there speaking to us. And I just really appreciated talking to her. I don't know if you can see, but there were also, like photographers there and other people like that. But they also just had people walking by who were selling fruit like guavas and mangoes. And it's interesting because one comrade asked her, so how do people make their living if they don't work in government, or if they don't work in, a public service area of some type, like if they're not with construction or traffic control or something like that. And she said that, there's a lot of entrepreneurs. She said there's a lot of entrepreneurs. And it was so interesting that she said that, because right when she said that, somebody was walking by selling mangoes, and they were yelling it out, mangoes, the mangoes, for sale. And so that was just perfect timing. And to that point, if you have a family and you want to open up a restaurant, what you do is you can pitch the idea to your local representative, because just like you have a doctor for each province, you also have a representative who's connected to the larger community of leaders, basically. Okay, I froze up. If you want to open up a restaurant in your province, for example, then you would communicate with your local community representative, and that representative would then speak to the larger entity of leaders who all are connected to the main municipal person who is with them at that time. And so they were just explaining to us how things are structured and how things operate. So when they were trying to decide on creating the new family code, the new policy that went into place in 2024, it took them a year to finalize it, because they had to wait for all of the provinces to all collect their votes, and then to send all the votes in, and then all the votes had to be counted and recounted to make sure, and then they were able to decide how to move forward. So I'm just saying that to show you the picture of this family restaurant that's here, because that's one of the ways that you can bring in income for your family. But the agreement is, if you're opening up a business, obviously you're going to make money for your family, but you also have to now give a fraction of it to the government and to that municipal, because you're holding space that is the collective mass of people. So you need to be giving back to the collective mass of people in some way, shape, or form, whatever that looks like. And if it's a barbershop, if it's a nail salon, whatever, it might not be a restaurant, but I just thought that was really cool. So whatever your skill sets are, you can open up this business. You just have to make a promise on, how you're going to be giving that money back. And if you don't do as well, like let's say you estimate doing this, this, and this, and if you don't do as well, then you revamp that plan and you communicate that to your leader and to the larger overarching leaders, and you regame and you re-go at it and try it again. But yeah, I thought that was a very conducive and humane way for people to just experience who they are and to contribute the collectivism piece. Last but not least, this is also one of my favorite statues that was also at the Carlotta Lucini Museum, because this is Carlotta. And as we have already said in previous report backs or seminars, not report backs, but seminars, as we've already said, Carlotta was an African woman who led a slave revolt out of Matanzas, Cuba in 1855. And it is very important to say her name, because without Carlotta, a lot of your ancestors and mine might not have made it, and they might not have gone to where they would go, to where you can be the person you are and I can be the person I am. Even if you didn't have ancestry in Cuba, you don't know that, because she helped free these people. They were able to go and do what they needed to do. So we need to say her name, and we need to thank her for what she did. Because of her, we have lineage and we are alive. So we thank you, Carlotta. And I thank you all for being here with us today. And I am now going to pass it to Baba Ajamu. Apologies.
Yes, indeed. So, just three quick points that I thought of during your outstanding, dynamic third installment is one, you just talked you're very articulate in talking about businesses in Cuba, entrepreneurship. And I just want to highlight that point because a lot of you out there, you hear the term socialism and you think, well, there's no room for creativity. Everybody has to make the same money because you don't study it. You just operate on what somebody told you. But in socialist Cuba, there is entrepreneurship. They do have constitutional provisions which prohibit how much money you can make owning a business, but you have every opportunity to start a business and do that for your family, as Shukura articulated. The second thing is Sister Carlotta was a woman who was kidnapped into slavery from Nigeria. She was a Yoruba woman, and she went to Matanzas. The sugar plantation there was where she was taken to engage in slave labor. And as Shakura, and as we've mentioned many times, she led a successful revolt of Africans there to overturn that. And the point is that they have this information available today in Cuba. They don't suffer from this confusion. Well, we've always been in the Americas. They know that we're African people who were kidnapped because they have a quality free education system. They don't think ignorance is a flex. So that needs to be said. And lastly, that the blockade, the economic blockade, Shakur, you mentioned the inability to use debit cards and credit cards because I think people, you have to think about who controls those mechanisms. Visa, Mastercard, American Express, those are capitalist countries who are prohibited from doing business in Cuba because of the economic blockade. So because of that, they are not going to have the capacity and the ability to use those mechanisms, to use those commerce mechanisms, another way to try to cripple the socialist revolution. So thank you for all three of your report backs. Very wonderful information. I hope you all go back and watch them. I hope you can listen to them so you can stop the confusion about socialism. We want to invite you back next week. We're going to go back to our usual format. Um, if you like that, great. If you don't like it, it's happening anyway. So what that means is that next Sunday we're going to talk about Malcolm X was an African, a revolutionary Pan-Africanist. He was not some so-called foundational Black American or all that bullshit. So join us next week so we can talk about that and confront that madness. We are not going to let you hijack Malcolm's legitimate legacy and his political contribution. The QR code in the upper left-hand corner, the red and white one, is all the AAPRP programs, so check that out, as well as the Forward Ever Shop. I visited Shakura yesterday, and she had the United Africa one, so I'm feeling like I need to get that one too. So go there and get clothes that support the African Revolution. If you are in the Sacramento area, California, or US, United States, or you know somebody here, then invite them or come yourself to our weekly community self-defense class on Thursday, every Thursday, 6 to 8 p.m. at the address of 2775 Cottage Way, like Cottage Cheese, Cottage Way, Unit 15, 2775 Cottage Way, Unit 15, 6 to 8. This week, we're scheduled to do our usual self-defense training, political education, but we're also scheduled to have a stop the bleeding training. And we're going to incorporate a lot of this stuff in our weekly classes going forward. So come through. You know, you cut yourself or somebody cuts himself around you, you should know how to deal with that. Join the APRP at aprp-intl.org. And the QR code in the bottom right, the black and white one, Burkina Books, is our program. Become a monthly sponsor. Shakura mentioned the green and white QR code. Support Vincent Ramos Brigade. Support the Cuban Revolution. Yes, they've always been there for us. We should be there for them. Stop listening to all those dumbass lies. No one's ever been there for us. Anybody that says that, or if you're listening to this and you say that, I'm telling you to your face, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. Shut up. The Cuban Revolution has been there for African people all over the world, here in the US, in Africa, period, for decades now. So shut up with that nonsense. We're ready to move forward and build this worldwide network to stop all this madness. We're sick of your nonsense. So get informed and stop spreading a bunch of nonsense. No one's ever been there for us. You sound like an idiot. Stop being an idiot. Start being informed. Damn, we're sick of this nonsense. Support my book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. Get it in your local library. Get it in the QR code is there. Get it in your bookstore. 100% of the proceeds go towards the anti-fascist work we're doing on the ground. We're not just talking about the work, we're doing it. Forward ever, backwards never. Enjoy the rest of your evening.